Hi, I'm Jim Gabe of Citizen Arts. Welcome to our new episode of In Their Words, What Public Officials Do for Us. This series takes a close look at some of the vast range of people who serve us at the federal, state, and local levels. Why a close look? Because we entrust them with responsibilities and powers that affect our lives in big and small ways every day. If you haven't listened to our prior episodes, here's what you've been missing. A state secretary of state who does far more than certify elections. For example, fighting cyber election misinformation. An interlude with a non-judgmental judge with insights into the noble role of those called to the bench. A state rep who's a self-described lifetime fighter for equal rights who gets 90% of her community's vote. A district attorney, a prosecutor, born to solve homicides, to do justice for his brothers and sisters. A coroner dedicated to giving voice to those who can't speak for themselves. In this episode, Citizen Arts is honored to present a conversation with Gregory Champagne, Sheriff of St. Charles Parish, Louisiana, a nationally recognized leader in the oldest continuing non-military law enforcement profession. An advocate for resetting social media magnified biases that foster divisiveness and destructive behavior. Be open-minded, understanding, patient. Truth will come out, says Sheriff Champagne. Welcome, Sheriff Champagne. We so appreciate your taking the time to join our discussion.
Well, thank you very much. James, I'm very happy to talk to you about the Office of Sheriff and what it entails.
I thought it might be good to start with a description of St. Charles Parish. People who have never been to Louisiana or maybe outside of New Orleans may not know what a place like St. Charles Parish is.
We are 25 miles due west of New Orleans. Lake Pontchartrain is on the northern end. We have Bayou des Allemands on the south to Lake Catawachi, Lake Salvador. We have small fishing communities. In fact, some of my ancestors in those areas fished for a living decades ago. But we have also developed into an economic engine in Louisiana due to our petrochemical industry. We have a nuclear facility, which has been here since the 1970s. We have oil refineries, several world-renowned, international chemical companies, Dow Chemical Company, Bayer Chemical Company, some smaller ones. We have large grain elevators. In addition, the Port of Louisiana extends through St. Charles Parish. It's the largest tonnage port in the country. A lot of shipping just behind me out on the Mississippi River. Those plants provide really well-paying jobs, which is a great source of property tax. So we have a very well-funded school system. My office is very well funded. I think we're in the second or third per capita income in the state. Our public school test scores are usually in that same range, sometimes first out of 64 parishes. So we are very economically advantaged parish. Our crime rate has been steadily decreasing for about 30 years as it goes up in many other places.
Well, thank you for that. I'm going to get to the meat of our discussion. Around 700 AD, Anglo-Saxons in England became the first group of people to recognize a person within their shire as a reeve or chief. The shire reeve eventually became known as the sheriff and was the person responsible for maintaining law and order in the county. This makes the sheriff the oldest continuing non-military law enforcement entity.
That's correct.
When English settlers first came to America, they brought the office of sheriff with them. What are the general responsibilities of your office of sheriff?
So we're what's called a constitutional office. That means basically that your office has its origins in your state constitution, as opposed to a statutory office. There are some other political offices or governmental offices that are created by statute, either state or local. But sheriffs are one of the few offices that are actually a constitutional office created in our Louisiana Constitution. And we are described as being the chief law enforcement officers for each parish. Parish in Louisiana is the same thing as a county, but due to the Catholic Church's influence in the territory of Louisiana going way back, the name was kept when governments were formed.
What are your primary responsibilities for the parish?
Well, we are the only law enforcement agency that is based in St. Charles Parish. There are 5 parishes in Louisiana that the sheriff is the only law enforcement agency. Most others, there are municipalities that can form their own police force, which are referred to as police departments. In all of the parishes, the sheriff is the chief law enforcement officer, but in most of the parishes, there are police departments with concurrent jurisdiction to the sheriff. The sheriff's authority is that of the chief law enforcement officer and can actually take control of any investigation that goes on. In my situation, we're what's called a full service law enforcement agency. We have a patrol division. We have an investigative division where detectives go out and investigate, a juvenile division. We run a jail. So we have correctional officers. We have responsibility for court security, bailiffs. We have school resource officers, crime scene division. We do basically every law enforcement function, except we don't have a crime lab. When a crime occurs, what parish has jurisdiction over the crime would depend a lot on the facts of the case. Where did the crime occur? Let's say if it's a homicide, where did it occur? That would be the agency that would have primary jurisdiction. There are things that, cross lines, such as, witnesses. We cooperate with each other, but that agency where the crime occurred would have the lead.
Is there anything particularly noteworthy as far as responsibilities go when distinguishing between a sheriff and a chief of police?
The duties are very similar, and most people confuse the two. We still have citizens who refer to us as the St. Charles Parish Police Department. Well, we're not. We're not a police department. We're the Office of Sheriff. We take pride in that name because it has such history. Police chiefs are usually created by a municipal government, a city council. In many cases, the police chief is appointed by the mayor. When that happens, the loyalty of a police chief goes to who? It goes to the person that gave them the job. City council has to ratify that appointment. So a police chief has to be cognizant of loyalties that he or she should have for that appointing agency. Sheriffs, we're a little different, and sometimes we're known as a little bit too independent because our authority doesn't come from an appointment. We're elected. We owe our allegiance to the people that elect us, and we're accountable directly to the public.
When you say you have the independence to do your job, who is your boss?
All my citizens who vote. If they're not satisfied with our job, certainly the citizens have every right, and they do on occasion vote someone out of office.
And is this system of being elected as a sheriff, is this the way it is throughout the country?
For almost all sheriffs, sheriff's offices are in, I think, 47 different states. The duties and responsibilities are not identical in every state. In some places, they're limited. In some places, they're pretty widespread.
I'm thinking of heroes you have as a kid, and I'm thinking Wyatt Earp, Pat Garrett, the OK Corral. That was always my notion of sheriffs, and the flashing of the badge and the pulling of the 6-gun. At what point in your life did you have a sense of the role of sheriff? And when did you start to think about that being a path for you?
Went to college, changed my major 3 or 4 times, didn't know what I wanted to do. I got my bachelor's degree in government political science, decided that I wanted to try law school. I was able to get some part-time jobs working for the district attorney's office in Baton Rouge while I was at the LSU Law School. So got really interested in criminal justice and law enforcement. When I graduated from the LSU Law Center, I was offered a position as an assistant district attorney here in St. Charles Parish. I did that for 14 years. Prosecuted my first murder case about a year and a half after I was out of law school and won it. So I became enthralled with the idea of prosecuting, especially violent criminals. I would volunteer to take all of those cases because I really felt that I was doing good to prosecute and take a violent criminal off the streets. I always thought that I would want to be district attorney, maybe, or judge, something in the traditional legal profession. And about 12 years into it, someone talked to me about the idea, why don't you consider running for sheriff? And the sheriff we had at the time announced that he was not going to run again. And my first response was, no, why would I want to do something crazy like that? Because the elections of sheriff in Louisiana going back years had the reputation of being very highly political, highly contested, dirty elections, because sheriffs had and continue to have a lot of authority. The idea grew on me and I decided to do it. I was successful as a prosecutor, working with the deputies, the police in the parish. And I won fairly easily. Took office in 96, and I've been reelected 7 times since then, a total of 8 terms. Most recently, last October, and the last 4 have been without opposition.
Running for office, yeah. And you had already alluded to the fact that it can be pretty colorful, not just for sheriff, but politics generally in Louisiana. How did you take to that? What did you learn going through that process of going out there and speaking to people about yourself and about the role you would play and how you would do it?
I have to tell you, the very first time it was very, very intimidating. The idea of putting yourself out there for public office and having to approach people. I mean, you feel like you're sort of forcing yourself on people. You have to do it. You have to go introduce yourself, tell them you're running for sheriff and why you think you can do a good job. I'm an introvert by nature. And so I had to really force myself to go smile and say, hi, Jack, I'm an assistant district attorney. I'm running for sheriff right now. And I hope you'll consider me. And that would generally start a conversation. And so I walked door to door, most of our parish, and I guess they liked what I had to say. I had a pretty good reputation, but the politics was intimidating. I got at least 2 telephone death threats during that first campaign. In those days, you didn't have caller ID. So people could leave a message, say, you better not win, or, I'm going to blow your head off.
It was just a competition. It wasn't any particular thing they thought you might discover and get them in trouble for.
Oh, correct. Yeah. When I ran, there were individuals who really wanted the job badly. And there's some people that can't handle politics. They just lose their mind over it. And, that bothered me, having a young family at the time. But that doesn't really happen anymore. It was rough and tumble in Louisiana in those days. It's gotten a lot better here. But, in many states, you have
Dirty politics. I mean, we have it at a national level. Let's be honest.
It's about as dirty as it gets. I view politicking as just doing my job. It's the best politicking you can do is have that interaction with people and do what you can to help them, and hear them out and try to do the best and be fair, be consistent.
A big part of that job is something you hadn't done before you were elected as sheriff, and that is running a sizable staff of various types of law enforcement people. Who are those people? And where did you have to develop yourself to be able to help them do their job?
When I first took office, almost 28 years ago, I was the new person in the organization. There were a few people that came on with me in the very beginning, but 95% of the employees were there. Now, over 95% of the people that work for me, I hired. So there was a dynamic that happens, I think, to all sheriffs if they serve long enough to where they go from being the new kid on the block where everybody's trying to advance their agendas. Everybody wants to go up the chain. And then as the old dogs retire and you hire the new dogs, they tend to more look up to you and want to know what is it we can do for you as opposed to what can we try to do to you. And I think back over it, it was just an amazing transition in the dynamic. I had basically a secretary doing my legal work in the DA's office. I went from 1 employee to 250 in a day. And that was quite a switch.
Let's get an idea of the range of people and the skills they bring to their work in your office.
Young sheriff's deputies, they're typically high school graduates, but we have had more and more employees who go to college first. We actually offer a pay incentive. If you have a college degree, you get
an extra pay differential.
But for the most part, many sheriff's offices, you're talking about high school graduates who we have to provide a lot of training to. We get some ex-military, which we find are always good. I mean, the military guys and ladies that come in, they already have self-discipline and they kind of fall in with the profession a lot quicker and easier because they're used to rules, routine, procedures. That's hard for some people because law enforcement is a paramilitary organization. We have to have a formal chain of command, unlike most businesses.
People need to understand a lot of operating procedures.
We have to spend a lot of time teaching that because the liability issues out there in making a wrong turn are immense. And sometimes it feels overwhelming to officers. They want to do the right thing, but they feel if they make a misstep, they're going to be on the evening news. So it's very difficult. And that pressure has led us to challenges in recruiting. It takes training, and more training. One of the things I wanted to establish is a training academy. I've done that. We have one of 25 in the state of Louisiana now, where we train our own recruits, and we have constant ongoing training. You cannot have too much training in this business, whether it be legal, defensive tactics, firearms training, first aid, you name it.
What would be a responsibility your staff has that I, as a civilian, would never imagine was something the sheriff's office took care of?
Louisiana is the only state I'm aware of where the office of sheriff actually collects taxes.
You collect taxes?
Property taxes. But we have an assessor. So the assessor is also elected. His job is to appraise the value of all real estate, commercial and private. And once he does that, he merely applies the tax rates, sends the data to me, and I just send out the bills and collect the money and distribute it to the tax bodies. I don't want to leave out, we have also civilian workers, clerical, administrative type employees who do the paperwork, the office, the secretarial things. One thing I always tell people
About law enforcement.
what other profession has to put on a ballistic vest other than the United States military in wartime to go out and do their job every day? I said, what other job, when you get up in the morning, do you have to put on a ballistic vest because there is a much heightened chance that you're going to be the subject of a violent attack, whether it be gunfire or somebody attempting to attack you? Think about that. We are seeing people armed with assault rifles. It's common. And what's also concerning is, I'm not trying to be political here, but as we all know, we have a border that a lot of people are crossing that we don't know who they are. What's called gotaways in our lingo. The Arizona and Texas sheriff will tell you about them every day of the week. Gotaways are individuals who do not turn themselves into the border. They do not avail themselves of the free plane ticket or registering. They come in generally at night in camouflage. They come in places where the Border Patrol is not because they're busy processing the other thousands of immigrants that come in every day. And we know what kind of weaponry the Mexican cartels have. The Mexican cartels are basically running the immigration system into the United States. You have to pay the cartels. We know what kind of firepower the cartels have. Fully automatic weapons, which are illegal for regular citizens here. Sheriffs in Texas on a hillside a couple of miles over the border watched a firefight with automatic weapons of cartel competitors, 12-hour gun battle going on. We're foolish to think they cannot get into our country. We're not so much seeing that yet, but I think that we have no reason to believe that we're not going to be seeing that in the future, that kind of firepower.
How do you train your people to deal with assault type weapons when they go into a situation, at a school, wherever it might be?
For the most part, cops in America carry handguns, semi-automatic handguns, Glocks, Smith & Wessons, whatever it may be. But more and more, you can be confronted with a violent criminal who has a rifle. With a rifle, you have a lot more firepower, the ability to shoot accurately at a longer distance. And we are implementing the ability to train more of our deputies, not just to carry them maybe on a regular basis, but to have access to rifles, long guns. Because if I'm confronted with somebody with an AK-47 and I've got a handgun, I'm at a big, big disadvantage. And it happens more often. We have to be prepared for that. I recently returned from Israel, where we got a full tour of the area that was attacked by the Hamas terrorists. Most of the citizens there in those kibbutz were unarmed. Very few people had weapons. The Israeli police officers that were near the Gaza border had to go into combat mode. They lost 58 people that day. Terrorists were coming in with AK-47s, and the police had 9mm handguns. So they are in the process of implementing officers to have long guns or rifles. It's unfortunate, but in this day and age, you just never know what we're going to come across. So we are upgrading to at least be equal to the firepower that the criminal element has.
Just as an aside, I was in Israel recently as well. One of the things that struck me is that whether you're on duty or off duty at time of war, you're expected to carry a gun. So every place I went,
the military and police, but not the citizens.
Right, not the citizens, whether it be law enforcement or in the military. I was in a bathroom at a gas station or in a restaurant, wherever it might be. I could be surrounded by military or law enforcement off duty with their weapons. I'm a military veteran, and it is quite a thing to be surrounded by these soldiers with their rifles slung over their shoulder. This gave new meaning to citizen soldier. In the U.S. military, there's a distinct line between where people in uniform can go with their guns and where they can't.
That's their reality.
You are president of the National Sheriff's Association. This is your second term.
Correct.
What are the principal issues sheriffs are facing across the country?
Well, I've already touched on it. I think the border and the relentless flow of immigrants. I'm not trying to suggest at all that immigrants are bad or immigration's bad. We need to have immigrants. We need to have a controlled immigration system. And right now it's totally uncontrolled, and it's being, in my opinion, rammed down the throats of American citizens. The person who comes in looking to get a job and do better for their family is not the people we fear. I think average citizens have no idea how much the Mexican drug cartels are controlling the flow of immigrants to the border. They can turn it off when they want. They can turn it on when they want. They can redirect it from Texas to California. 2 million gotaways, they estimate, in the last 3.5 years. So we have no idea who they are, what their intentions are. Putting that aside, I would say another challenge we have in law enforcement is social media. Social media can be a positive source for us to get information out to the public, and I use it that way. It can also be a very negative source. Things go out without explanations. Everybody gets all riled up. I think in many cases, the simplicity and ease of disrespecting somebody on social media has led to shootings among young people. Things you see in the major cities where a group or one person will go shoot up a neighborhood, drive-by shooting. A lot of that stuff is just as a result of disrespect. On social media, there's a lot of misinformation out there. There was a study recently that 47% of people from age 19 to 30 said they got their primary news from TikTok reels. And TikTok is loaded with misinformation. When I first took office, there was no social media then. And now we deal with it, and it's threats at school. A day doesn't go by, a parent doesn't say my kid's being bullied on social media. Social media dominates a whole lot of what we deal with, what the mood of the public is. Some of it's healthy, but a lot of it, I fear, I'm concerned with.
We had an opportunity to speak with the coroner of Charleston County, South Carolina. For her, the primary challenge now is drugs. It's opioid type concoctions that are showing up. And she said, no, it's worse than ever because there are more drugs on the street. And what is more available oftentimes is a mix of different types of drugs that can be lethal very quickly. How about from your perspective as a sheriff, is the drug situation getting worse? And if so, how do you contend with it?
I think it is very, very bad. Fentanyl is probably the biggest issue with overdoses. Our deputies always carry Narcan. It's a counter drug to opioids. It can actually save people because too much fentanyl and respiratory system shuts down and the person dies. Narcan reverses that. There have been times when we've revived people who were probably going to die maybe 5 times in a week. So it is very expansive. The Chinese are mass producing the precursors. There are pill mills in southern Mexico, all run by the cartels, part of the drug trade, another side effect of a really open border. Add to that the relaxation of certain drug laws. We see more and more kids using marijuana. I'm not saying they're dying of it, but I think it's creating an overall attitude about, well, drugs are not that bad. Go ahead and try some. I'm seeing marijuana use amongst teens at a level I've never seen before. It does affect their grades in school. Yes, drugs are a problem throughout our society. There's not a sheriff I talk to that doesn't have a problem with fentanyl.
Are there agencies that you are involved with that are helpful in doing your work?
Absolutely. Well, first, we work with all our surrounding sheriff's offices. As far as our federal partners, after 9/11, a whole lot of things changed regarding the interoperability and cooperation. You wouldn't know what the FBI was doing back in those days. Now, information is being shared. They have programs where we have members who serve on an FBI task force, DEA task force, U.S. Marshal task force to help round up wanted fugitives. And there are other task forces. Homeland Security does various types of investigations as well. So there is a lot of interaction between state and local law enforcement and our federal partners, which certainly helps.
Speaking of the FBI, you have some FBI training. What is that and how has that had application?
I've been to the FBI Academy on a couple of occasions on law enforcement development executive seminars, 2-week type stuff. And it's excellent training.
In your leadership with the National Sheriff's Association, you head up their committee on legal aspects of sheriff work. What are you looking to accomplish? What needs to be fixed?
We have 2 major committees, legal affairs and government affairs. Government Affairs Committee looks at proposed legislation and evaluates it and takes positions, whether for or against, depending upon how sheriffs feel about it, what the needs are. Our Legal Affairs Committee, we will evaluate, the legal implications of those proposed bills and proposed legislation. Another big area we jump into is we will file several amicus briefs with the Supreme Court every year. An amicus brief is what's called a friend of the court brief. Parties are able to file amicus briefs arguing for a position that the 2 main parties are fighting over. We only get involved in issues that we believe will have an impact on all sheriffs, such as things like federal qualified immunity, treatment of inmates. We try to help the court understand the issues they're evaluating. And we know we've had an impact because our briefs have been mentioned at times in the court or court rulings. We're very proud of that. So we do play a role in attempting to help educate judges. We do that mostly at the U.S. Supreme Court level, although occasionally at a circuit court. But we do file a lot of amicus briefs, and our side usually prevails. I mean, the side that we weigh in on, because we're very careful. We don't just do it in every case. We don't want to water down our influence. We want to do it when it's really important to us, and we're convinced that we have the correct position. So that's very gratifying. Those are the two main things Legal Affairs Committee of NSA does. And we have to look at a lot of legislation. We looked at a lot of legislation back in 2020 following George Floyd, the anti-police time period, we call it. There were a whole lot of proposals coming out, to more strenuously regulate law enforcement use of force. So we were really keeping busy evaluating that and explaining to congressmen, senators, why such a bill would be a good idea, why such a bill would be a bad idea. Here's the unintended consequences of it. So we do feel like we play a constructive role, at the national level, which is why we're the National Sheriff's Association.
Let's go back to what you just mentioned, perceptions of law enforcement and the George Floyd period. Where are we now? Is there a changing perception of law enforcement?
One thing I've learned is that public opinion and political thought are like a pendulum. It swings really wide from one direction to the other. And I think we're seeing that. A lot of this phase we're in started in Ferguson, the hands up, don't shoot issue. Then Baltimore, Freddie Gray situation added a lot of fuel to that fire. And I think a lot of that coincided with the presidential politics of the time. There was so much division that was building up in the country. And then, of course, the absolute worst was George Floyd incident, which brought things to a breaking point, obviously. And so the pendulum then swung really. We need more police reform. And by the way, every state has passed some amount of police reform. Some of it's good, some of it maybe not so good. There's been some federal, mostly through executive orders and what you have to do through grants, because the Congress can't regulate the way police operate on a day-to-day basis. They can provide incentives. If you want to get a grant, you got to have this in your procedures, things like that. So we've been through a lot of that. We've seen increases in crime in major cities to the point where the people are saying, well, wait a minute, we can't just get rid of the police. I do think we're seeing the pendulum swing back towards more sane position. Not to say that we do not have to be on our toes, because we could be one bad incident away on a cell phone video from riots happening again. Unfortunately, there'll be a bad video, something looks really horrible, bad optics, and we're off to the races again. Unfortunately, and as we enter into a presidential election year, I think things are going to bubble a little bit in that regard. From the standpoint of officers, I mean, we can do what we can. We believe, obviously, the overwhelming number of officers want to do the right thing. They want to be fair and reasonable. But again, we're a job that has to put on a ballistic vest every day and go out. I don't have the numbers, but I get an alert every time there's an officer killed in the line of duty. And we have seen a spike in incidents. Are they isolated? We hope so. But it is concerning. There are obviously some people who just have no fear and a lack of respect for police, even though that particular police officer they may be assaulting had nothing to do with things that caused them to feel that way. Bottom line is, I think the pendulum in the hostile police atmosphere has swung a little back more toward the middle.
When you talk about all it takes is one incident, it could also be that one incident where somebody in a uniform does something and then it's in the news. Is this something you lose sleep over?
Yeah, it can happen any day. You pray to God it doesn't.
I'm curious about how you train these young people coming in to deal with these potentially volatile situations.
The whole police training model has really changed over many years, not just since 2015. Let's all be honest. Cops back in the old day, they were expected to be tougher, to deal with situations kind of hard and fast, and let's bring everything under control. Nowadays, we have to take a different approach, to be more warm and fuzzy in dealing with people. And there were a lot of issues that were unaddressed too. I mean, the ability to deal with people who may have had some degree of mental illness, autism, All that training is now incorporated into learning to recognize that you may be dealing with somebody who is in crisis. CIT training, the crisis intervention team, which was non-existent when I took office, now is the norm. We have had to expand our training to be able to envision all of these possible scenarios with all of these possible states of non-normalcy. There are a lot of new training products out now. We have just equipped ourselves with virtual reality glasses. You put on the goggles and you see what an autistic child sees when a police car with lights comes at him. It's a distorted, chaotic thing, and it's eye-opening to provide officers with the ability to try to think in the shoes of the person they're dealing with. People with mental illness, someone who is under the influence of alcohol, mental illness, substance abuse. Those are things that cops never really studied 40 years ago, 20, 25 years ago. Now it's all a normal incorporated part of training. That, okay, here's the law, here's what you do with the typical situation, but understand now you're going to be dealing with somebody who's in crisis. It's a lot more work. It's a lot more difficult than it used to be, but the public expects it. That's what's happening now in modern law enforcement training.
Is there a situation you've been in or your department has been in that was particularly challenging or rewarding that will further illuminate the sorts of issues you deal with?
We're very fortunate here to have a pretty peaceful jurisdiction. We had really a 30-year record low in the 7 FBI categories of crime. But the one thing about this job is you never know what tomorrow brings. It could be anything any day. It could be a jail problem, could be a crime problem, could be a bomb threat at a school. Parents go absolutely bananas when there's threats to their kids, rightly so.
I'm sure sometimes even a veteran like yourself, who has been doing this for many years and grew up in the parish and knows so much about the parish, has moments where you have to get away from it all. And in reading about you, you are a man with a special Louisiana soul, a rhythm. You are a trumpet player.
Well, I don't play as much anymore. I started out in school, went to college, joined the marching band there, met my wife in the marching band in college.
So you were out there at halftime marching around in the band.
Yes, Nicholls State University. I enjoyed it. I played in the jazz band in college. Actually got in a group. We did some part-time jobs. Continued to do it. And occasionally I'll play with a couple of groups. There's a guy called Luther Kent, a blues singer out of New Orleans. Lives in Baton Rouge now, but I play with his band occasionally, play with them at the Jazz Fest. There's another band called the Wise Guys. They do a lot of pop hits. I go sit in with them. Actually, the most common thing I do is play taps at funerals, military funerals. I'm part of an organization, Bugles Across America. They send out a notice because there are not enough live buglers to play for military veterans' funerals. And that's sad but gratifying to be able to do that.
I always get such a kick when I go to, let's say, an orchestral performance, and I know the conductor is holding back the brass. They want to blow it out, and he won't let them do it.
Yeah.
But your approach in playing with these smaller groups, being in a marching band, is you've been able to let it out. I'm wondering, you put your life into your job as sheriff, how it has changed you.
Well, it's the kind of job that you really never are able to completely get away from the public. Who do they hold responsible for making sure that their lives, property, and children are kept safe every day? Local law enforcement, local sheriff. It's 24/7. I've learned how to compartmentalize problems.
If you could snap your fingers and change one thing that would make that vista out there more conducive to the type of world you as a law enforcement individual is dedicated to creating, what would that be?
Good question. Right off the cuff, the ability to be able to reset the biases that people may have in the public. We have a lot of bias now. We're in a time of great divisiveness, a lot of it due to influences and disinformation that we're constantly being bombarded with. So many people have fixed opinions. We enjoy public support here in St. Charles Parish. I would say 85% of the people know we're out to do good. But even before hearing the whole story, if they see some snippet of a little edited video, they immediately jump to conclusion, look at the cops treating these people badly and they're doing this. And it's difficult to counter that when the biased side of the story goes out. So I would just have everybody say, just be open-minded, understand that there are two sides to everything. Don't jump to conclusions and just be patient. The truth will come out.
Sheriff Champagne, you have been so forthcoming with your feelings. One of the things that most affected me in my visits to your part of the country was the passion people bring to their commentary. And yours is full of that passion. And I wish you the best of good health. We're fortunate to have someone like you serving the public.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. It's very nice of you to do it. I enjoyed this experience.
Jeff and I will be in touch.
We may be down there for LSU's first home game this year.
Okay, look me up.
We will do. Go Tigers.
We promise not to get too rowdy in your parish.
Well, we don't put up with that.
Because you can tell by looking at us, we're that type, right?
I can tell. Yeah.
All right, take care. Bye-bye. There you have it, dear listeners. The latest episode in our Citizen Arts series, In Their Words, What Public Officials Do for Us. We hope you found this conversation with Sheriff Gregory Champagne enlightening. We hope you'll join us for upcoming episodes with the likes of mayors, city planners, tax collectors, county executives, firefighters, U.S. Congresspeople, and more. Citizen Arts is dedicated to presenting information, analysis, and constructive opinion about matters of civic importance. We're a not-for-profit 501c3 organization. Your interest in and support of our work are greatly appreciated. Please take a moment to subscribe to this podcast. On behalf of Sheriff Champagne and my Citizen Arts colleagues, heartfelt thanks for tuning in. I'm especially grateful to Jill Gabe, our executive producer, and Jeff Lewis, our project producer and technical guru. We invite you to join the conversation. Check us out at citizenartscreative.org and let us know what you think. And always, please stay healthy in mind and body, wealthy in goodwill, and wise in action.